record. Okay. Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Peggy Kurtz. This is the monthly public meeting of Lower Hudson Group of Sierra Club, which includes Lower Hudson Group of Sierra Club includes Westchester, Rockland County, Putnam, parts of Dutchess, and Orange County. This program this evening is sponsored by Rockland Audubon and ROAR, which stands for Religious Orders Along the River. Just starting with Sierra Club, I just want to mention that we focus generally on state and local issues around climate and water issues, but other issues as well, including toxic chemicals and lots of other things. And we really tend to try to focus everybody on local actions and on state legislation. And we meet monthly, and we try very hard to connect everything to actions that we can all work on collectively together and individually. So I just wanted to give a chance to each of our co-sponsors this evening to say a brief word about their groups. Sister Carol, do you want to start? And I apologize if last time I did not think to do that.
That's okay. And I see we have a few members who were able to make it. So great to see. Definitely Ari Doretta, at least on my screen here. So I just want to say it is really, and you use the word orders. It's really, we call ourselves religious organizations along the river. Right. But no, Peggy, I can understand why you say orders, because we're basically mostly women, religious congregations, and few men congregations that not necessarily have land along the river, although some of us do. I'm at the Mount St. Vincent, so I had the beautiful river right here. But we are a group that since 1996 have been involved in terms of the Hudson River bioregion issues, and we consider as our colleagues Riverkeeper, Clearwater, Scenic Hudson, and certainly my friends in Sierra Club, because we are not the experts in what's happening, and we rely on webinars like this to inform us. And so, as many of you know, we've been involved with the issues of PFASs, with the waste management, with now the nuclear, modules that's being kind of advocated for by Governor Hochul. So there's so many issues that we work with and to advocate for, against, and we thank you. That enough, Peggy?
Yep, that's great. Christine, just a quick word, and then afterwards I'll give you time to talk about something else that you wanted to talk about. Yeah.
Sounds good. Good evening, everyone. I'm Christine Toth, Conservation Chair at Rockland Audubon Society. And at Rockland Audubon, we do field trips, like birding field trips, several times throughout the month. We also have a monthly nature program at Congers Lake Community Center. It's the first Friday evening of every month. And we also have we're working on several conservation issues, all biodiversity related, and I'll talk about them a little more later in the program.
Great. Okay, so I just want to mention before we move ahead that the next monthly meeting of public meeting of Lower Hudson Group of Sierra Club is March 17th. We try to land on the third Monday of the month, and it will focus on Governor Hochul's big push for nuclear in New York State. How different is the small modular reactors that she's pushing for? And we'll ask the question, is nuclear the answer to global warming? So, and we will have a couple of people who are experts on that speaking. So before we begin, I just want to say it would feel a little odd to begin this evening without addressing the rather extraordinary moment that we're in with this new administration. I know many of us on this call are feeling almost under assault in multiple ways, and it really is stunning. We're seeing such a reckless dismantling of one major structure of our government after another that it feels like they are taking a wrecking ball to the government and all of the protections that we all grew up taking for granted. So we'll try to brainstorm a little bit later about what we can do, actions we can take right now, together and individually. And in another meeting coming up, we'll focus, once things have had a little time to settle in, to focus on the Trump administration, specifically in regard to climate and other environmental issues. I find that there's not enough focus. These issues are crises, and they're continuing to move ahead, whatever administration is there. And so to go backwards feels very, very painful. I just thought I'd start with like 2 sentences, a slightly altered quote from the essayist Christine Solnit that helps me sometimes. So she said, "They want you to feel powerless and to surrender and to let them trample everything, but we are not going to let them. The fact that we cannot save everything does not mean that we cannot save anything, and everything we can save is worth saving." So with that theme, I think it's very much apropos, it's very much on target for the subject of this evening's meeting, which is biodiversity. But we can't save everything, but whatever we can save is very important. So the program this evening focuses on another major, I know we all are very well aware of climate change, but this is another major environmental issue that I find very few people are even aware of, and that's even environmentalists. And that is the crisis of extinctions and the loss of biodiversity. So this is the first event in a series of programs that we hope to do over the course of the year on different topics relating to biodiversity and extinctions, to raise awareness for all of us about the loss of biodiversity. I hope you'll please save the date of April 21st for the next talk in this series. It's also the third Monday of the month, April 21st. And that is going to be about the link between the pandemics and the loss of biodiversity. I'm sure we're all very aware that there's a possible bird flu pandemic that's imminent. So let's try to understand why and the link with environmental degradation. This is an excellent speaker, a scientist who spoke for us 5 years ago and was just terrific. So she's said yes to come back. So one other thing before we move ahead, and that is that I want to mention that our speaker is from the Center for Biological Diversity. And I notice on their website that it says that the Center for Biological Diversity sued the Trump administration on day one. And this, of course, this was about the interaction of Musk and Doge with the White House. So it's my pleasure to introduce Noah Greenwald, our speaker. Noah is the the Endangered Species Director at the Center for Biological Diversity. Before he joined the center, he worked as a field biologist surveying northern spotted owls and, among other birds, Hawaiian songbirds. So Noah?
Thanks, Peggy, and thanks to the Lower Hudson Sierra Club for inviting me to give this talk. Very much appreciated, and I appreciate your words as well. We certainly are in a moment right now. So as Peggy said, I'm the Endangered Species Director at the Center for Biological Diversity, and I've actually been at the center for just about 28 years. So I've been working to protect species across the country for a long time. The Center for Biological Diversity, for those who don't know, is a nonprofit that works nationally to protect endangered species and wild places. We work to secure a future for all species, great and small, on the brink of extinction. So I'm going to talk about the extinction crisis. And as Peggy mentioned, you know, the climate change and what's happening there has become very front and center in the public's mind. But the extinction crisis, on the other hand, has not gained the same notoriety, I guess is maybe the best word, that it needs to. And I'll just start off by noting that they're very much interrelated. Well, actually, I'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end. First, I'll talk about what is the extinction crisis. So species have always gone extinct, as I'm sure you're all aware. almost more than 90% of all species that ever existed are now extinct. But what's happening now is distinctly different. And so scientists estimate that over geologic time, roughly one species went extinct every million years. And that rate is now greatly accelerated, as much as 1,000 times. So much so that the estimates from scientists are that a species is going extinct roughly every hour. So we're losing species at a greatly accelerated rate all around the world. Scientists from the UN has probably all of you have heard of the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change. Well, there's a similar panel for extinction, and that panel, which involves over 450 scientists from all over the world, has really been ringing the alarm bells, and it's called the IPBES. It's perhaps the worst acronym that anyone's ever come up with, the Intergovernmental Policy Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, the IPBES. They estimate that as many as 1 million species are at risk of extinction in the coming decades if we don't turn things around. And it's not just species, it's populations as well, and it's just wildlife in general. Even many common species are starting to decline. So, for example, scientists estimate that since 1970, there's 3 billion fewer birds than there were at that time in North America. So we're losing wildlife populations. We're living in a greatly depauperate world compared to past generations. A study by World Wildlife Fund found that overall vertebrate species have declined by an average of 2/3 since 1970. So we're really losing many species. And kind of to put a face on it a little bit, there are some species from New York that have gone extinct. So, for example, it's named the Carolina parakeet, but the Carolina parakeet also occurred in the Northeast in New York. And I don't know how many of you have been to the tropics or even the South in the U.S. Texas and Florida both have parakeets, but it's essentially a parrot. So a very brightly colored, gregarious bird that once occurred in Eastern North America, but no longer. Perhaps more famous, the passenger pigeon, once believed to be one of the most abundant vertebrate species that ever existed, darkened the skies for days at a time. In some cases, the flocks flying over, also extinct. And a number of endangered species in New York as well. Perhaps many of you have heard of the Atlantic sturgeon, which still occurs in the Hudson, but is much depleted from where it was in the past. A number of shorebirds, the red knot and the piping plover, both visit New York State and are quite endangered. Actually, I'll talk about the piping plover a little bit, in that it's actually a success story on some level. Its numbers have come back quite a bit, but I'll talk about that a bit more. So I paint a bleak picture, that we're losing the natural world. It's coming apart in front of our eyes. Why does this matter? People would ask, if species have always gone extinct, why does it matter to us? Well, there's a number of reasons for that, why it matters. One is that species, they provide, most of our medicines and all of our food. They're the building blocks of ecosystems. And ecosystems provide a lot of services to us that people aren't necessarily aware of. They clean our air, they clean our water, they buffer areas from flooding, they cycle nutrients, they pollinate our crops. We are tied to ecosystems in the same way that these species that are being lost are tied to those ecosystems. And so the fact that so many species are disappearing should be of great concern to us all, because it indicates that the natural world, which supported our cultures and our societies for eons, is unraveling. Oftentimes people use an analogy to an airplane. If you take off one screw, it'll probably still fly. But how many screws can you take off of that airplane before it comes crashing from the sky? And that's very much the same with ecosystems, that when we lose species, we lose the functionality of those ecosystems. So it really in the same way as climate change, it really threatens our quality of life for future generations if we don't get a handle on this. I would also note that species are an inspiration. You know, our music, our painting, our so much of our culture, our architecture is inspired by the natural world and often by species themselves. So if you know, one thing I like to say about it is, you know, as we lose more species, a little bit of magic is lost from the world. And our world just becomes poorer and less interesting the more species we lose. And actually, there's been many studies that have shown connections between human health and the health of the natural world and biodiversity. You know, we feel better when we're in diverse ecosystems. We feel better when we're in the natural world. We feel more connected to things. And so it's important for our mental health as well. Again, these species, you know, each species that is lost is an indicator of decline in that ecosystem. Just a little bit more about North America. So there's an organization called NatureServe, which categorizes the status of species in North America. And they have a classification system where they rank species as critically imperiled or G1, imperiled, vulnerable, apparently secure, and secure. So it's a 5-system classification. And currently they rank over 10,000 species in North America as critically imperiled or imperiled. So we really are losing things fast. I would note, you know, given the focus on the Hudson, that in North America, species are going extinct roughly 10 times faster in freshwater ecosystems than they are in terrestrial ecosystems. So we're losing fish, we're losing mussels, we're losing crayfish. And given how important water is to life, that should add to the concern because that reflects the degree that we've degraded our rivers and lakes with pollution, with bank disturbance, with dams, because that's where we're really losing the most species. And again, I mentioned the Atlantic sturgeon. It's a perfect example of that. You know, once a very widespread species, now much depleted. Atlantic salmon is another one. You know, Atlantic salmon used to occur all the way quite a bit down the East Coast, and now you can just find a couple surviving populations in Maine. So that's the extinction crisis and why we should care. I mentioned that the extinction crisis and climate change are intricately linked. Not very many people realize that a big source of emissions beyond burning of fossil fuels is land clearance. Cutting down forests, plowing land actually results in a tremendous amount of emissions of greenhouse gases. And it's a big factor in why we're experiencing climate change. And so very much, you know, the two crises need the same solution, which is that we need to protect and restore more of the natural world if we're going to address both the extinction crisis and the climate crisis. And that leads me to some of the causes of this extinction crisis. Habitat destruction remains the single biggest cause of extinction in the world. You know, our ever expanding human footprint into natural ecosystems is the main cause of extinction. Other causes include invasive species. That's probably the second biggest cause at this point. Is just our global trade has just spread an incredible number of species around the planet. And actually, I'll just digress for a minute, you know, because we've seen these tragic fires. We saw Lahaina, we saw Los Angeles, I don't think people really appreciate how much the spread of invasive grasses in particular, but also other invasive species plays a role in those fires. And the fact that we've spread these fire promoting grasses, in many cases from Africa, but from other places as well, all over the world. And we're coming into a warming planet. And so, we're gonna continue to see these fires that just create these tragedies because of the spread of invasive species. Also, the spread of diseases associated with invasive species is a big cause of species decline and extinction. I'm sure most of you have heard of white nose syndrome, which killed millions of bats, with the Northeast being particularly hard hit in the loss of bats. Multiple species, 5, 6 species, just devastated by this disease, this fungal pathogen that's largely believed to have come from Europe, because bats have it in Europe but aren't affected by it, but our bats are. And it's a good example of ecosystem services because bats eat insects, and it's estimated that millions and millions of dollars have been lost with the loss of bats in terms of loss of crops. So invasive species is a big cause of extinction as well as habitat destruction. Direct exploitation can often be a source of extinction for species as well. In the Northeast and Southeast, one victim of that has been freshwater turtles. The spotted turtle is an example, but many other species of turtles that occur in New York State and otherwise that are taken for food. Another New York State occurring species that's currently endangered is the eastern hellbender, the biggest salamander in North America, also at risk from collection. Mostly it's at risk from what I mentioned before, degradation of rivers. It's very much a clean water, clean river species. If you haven't heard of the eastern hellbender, I encourage you to Google it. It's also called the snot otter, or old lasagna sides is another name. It's quite the creature. It's one of those creatures that's so ugly that it's incredibly charismatic. So those are the main causes. Climate change now is a growing cause of species loss and extinction. And if we don't, scientists are estimating that if we allow an increase in temperature above the 1.5 degrees C, we're at risk of losing a third of all species on the planet to climate change. And species, because of habitat destruction and
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? What you just said?
There's a review study I was just looking at today that looked at over 400 studies on the risk of species loss to climate change, that estimated that if we allow climate change to exceed 1.5 degrees C, which is what the Paris Accord established as a target to limit climate change, that will lose as much as a third of all species on the planet. And mountaintop species, island species, freshwater species are particularly at risk from climate change. And climate change and habitat destruction and fragmentation really combine in a bad way for species, because for species to be able to move across the landscape, they need connected habitat. I'll take a question. Do you have a question, Susan?
Yeah, how close are we to 1.5? I think we're already there.
I think we are. That's my understanding, is that we're roughly there. And
so you're talking about this is what's happening. It's not if it's going to happen, it is happening.
Right. I think if we could turn that around. I know it doesn't look great for that right now with the current administration, but I think we could keep it to that. We could limit it to that. And I mentioned, that we have to protect and restore more of the natural world, things like planting forests. But yes, of course, we have to stop emitting so many greenhouse gases from burning fossil fuels if we're going to keep it close to 1.5. But yeah, it is quite bleak. So thanks for that, Susan. I appreciate that. It is true. So one of the things that I work with and the Center for Biological Diversity works with and does provide some hope is the Endangered Species Act. And we in the US have really what's considered one of the strongest laws for protecting biodiversity and species in the world. And that's a lot of the work I've been involved in, and the center is involved in, is working to get more species protected under the Endangered Species Act. So the law, like many of our environmental laws from the 1970s, allows people to directly participate in implementation of the act. And so one of the ways that we do that is by petitioning to have species listed. So for example, the Eastern hellbender was a species that we petitioned for protection for in 2010. And unfortunately, the process is very slow. So 15 years later, just this past December, we got it proposed as an endangered species. And that's a lot of the work we do is through the Endangered Species Act, which really is a strong law and really recognized, I think, the crux of the problem. It said in its purposes and in its beginning, it says that species have been driven to extinction by economic forces untempered by adequate concern for species. So it recognized that there was a fundamental conflict between our economic activities and species survival, and has very strong protections for species. It prohibits any person from taking a listed threatened or endangered species, which is defined broadly to kill, harm, harass, or even destroy habitat. Person has been broadly applied to municipalities, to companies, to really any entity that's harming species. It also requires federal agencies to avoid jeopardizing listed species and actions that they permit, carry out, or fund, or to adversely modify their critical habitat. So this is our primary tool for protecting wildlife and protecting species, and one that we've always worked to vigorously enforce. And I think one that's, hopefully going to be able to help get us through this administration. And one of the primary tools we're using to fight back against this administration. I learned this weekend from a scientist that a species that I once surveyed for, the northern spotted owl, which is associated with old growth forests where I live here in Oregon, that because of the hiring freeze and the funding freeze, that there's no money to survey for spotted owls this year in Oregon, Washington, or Northern California. And so, that's something we're going to daylight and focus on, because, to the extent the Forest Service logs habitat, they base that on doing surveys. So how are they going to ensure that they don't harm spotted owls, which are an endangered species, if they can't do surveys? So there's going to be many fights like that we're going to have, and that I'm sure the Sierra Club and Audubon are going to have in the next 4 years to help protect the natural world. And you all can help with that by talking to your legislators, by supporting the Endangered Species Act, by letting your legislators and everyone that protecting endangered species is critical to our own survival and our own quality of life. That's one way you can help. There's more information on our website. Actually, there's a ton of information on our website, which is biologicaldiversity.org. And you can also sign up. We have alerts that we send out to contact your senator or your representative in relation to bills surrounding the Endangered Species Act. Just even more local than that, I'll just mention this is personal passion of mine. Plant native plants in your yard. It helps wildlife. Don't mow your lawn. Let the leaves stay. And those little kinds of things actually help. So I'll leave it at that. And I'm glad to take questions and just have a discussion.
Let's see if
Noah?
we have questions.
Oh, so
Go
can I
ahead.
raise my hand?
Sure, go ahead.
Um,
Go ahead. Go for it, Rob.
Noah, I'd like to point out that many species are going extinct before they're even being discovered. So where we have, especially like in the Amazon, where at least under the Bolsonaro, uh, huge tracts of Amazon rainforest were, either slashed and burned or cut down for the production of beef to be shipped to the United States to be eaten by people at McDonald's and other places like that. Many people are not even aware of the fact that many species are being extinct, going extinct before we even know about them. And another little point, I've been a fly fisherman since I've been in my 20s. I'm in my 70s now, and I have watched the decline of aquatic insects, for instance, which are the bottom of the food chain for native trout. I've watched the temperatures of rivers rise on average to the point where they can't support trout anymore. I've watched them become silted so that they no longer. This is all in my lifetime. So at my age now, I'm like not very optimistic, but still hoping. That's it.
Yeah, that's right.
Go ahead.
We've named about 8 million species is the estimate, and it's unclear how many there are, but estimates range from 30 to 50 million. So we've only actually named a fraction of the species on the planet, and so we're absolutely losing and have lost many species that we don't even know.
So George and Eleanor, I see your hands. I just wanted to interpose one thing, and that is that to Rob's comment, and that is that I have a friend who lives in Denmark, and she said when she goes north to the fjords, she said they're beautiful, they're spectacular, but people don't realize unless they're there on the land that some of the fjords are kind of dead zones. They've become dead zones over the time that she's lived there. And it's, so painful to see. George, I think you had your hand up first.
Noah, are there Endangered Species Acts at the state level?
Yeah, most states, actually almost all states, have some sort of endangered species law. I think Alabama is one of the only states that doesn't, which is actually extra depressing because Alabama is actually one of the most biodiverse states in the country. But yeah, most do. New York has one of the stronger ones, and we do work to get species listed under the New York Endangered Species Law. Most states have lesser protections for habitat than they do for species. So they'll, prohibit killing or otherwise harming or harassing a species directly, but they won't include protections for their habitat, which is unfortunate. And then some states only protect animals, but not plants, which is interesting since plants, are essentially the foundation of life, of all of our life. They're the only thing that converts sunlight into food, into resources. So to not protect them is kind of astounding. But yeah, so many states do, but generally not as strong as the Federal Endangered Species Act.
Eleanor?
Yes,
And
hi.
then Ellen and
Um, you had mentioned before that the land clearance is one of the most serious damaging effects to biodiversity. And my sister, who's from New Hampshire, is on this call right now too. I had asked her to be on it. we're a member of this conservation trust in Cape Cod where it's a compact, all of Cape Cod, where towns try to buy up land. And I'm wondering, is there anything like that down around here? Does anybody know? I don't see much awareness. You know, I just see the riverfront being built up and
I mean, I don't know, are there others who want to speak up who might be more
Well, we have the
knowledgeable?
Nature Conservancy.
I was just going to say that, and we also have Trust for Public Land, Scenic Hudson.
do they actually, so Trust for Public Lands, and these are local to Hudson Valley, or, I mean, are there any groups that are doing this? So
Sarah, do you want to speak to that?
I know that in Westchester, there's a pretty well-organized group called the Westchester Land Trust.
the land trust. Yeah,
So that's very specific to Westchester
the
County.
Westchester. It just seems like that's the one thing that you had mentioned that would be one of the most important things we could do locally.
Yes, and
Here in Rockland, Peggy, you worked a lot on the open space lands.
right. The county does have an open space initiative. I can't comment on, whether it's, I doubt that it's enough, but yeah. Marcy, do you want to speak? Yeah, you have to unmute. And then I see
I
Carol.
would say that the county is acquiring more open space. The county's within the sphere of Scenic Hudson, but I'm not aware of any Scenic Hudson properties in here, but we pay attention to what Scenic Hudson does. Upper Nyack acquired property with the help of, I think, the Open Space Institute and maybe some others. So it's on the radar, and the county is actually about to do an update to their comprehensive plan and starting a sustainability task force. So those would be areas where people could bring that up.
The what task force?
The climate, or I think, I'm not sure what they're calling it, Climate Smart Task Force.
Climate Smart Task Force.
And
Okay.
and there's also, as Marcy mentioned, the process is starting for the comprehensive plan where this kind of thing, goals are put together. Maybe, and I do see hands up, just one second,
Yeah.
but maybe Noah, this is a good moment to talk about the idea of 30 by 30.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, I mentioned the IPBES. That's one of the goals related to what the UN has come up with. And there's the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is a UN program, which countries have signed on to. Actually, the US is unfortunately one of the few countries that did not sign on to the convention. And so to address the extinction crisis, the UN and countries from around the world agreed to a goal of protecting 30% of the Earth's surface by 2030 and 50% by 2050. And it partially comes from, maybe some of you have heard of E.O. Wilson. He was a former Harvard professor who sort of championed the idea of biodiversity. And he died within the last few years. He was quite the guy, but he had this concept of the half Earth concept. So if you look that up, you can find of protecting half the Earth. And he makes the case that we're not as far away from that as what you would think. When you look at something like the boreal forest that spreads around Canada and the former Soviet Union, that's a very large area of natural lands. Large areas of the Amazon that are still untouched, that when you piece all that together, we're not as far from protecting half the Earth as one would think. And so that's the goal for 2050 established by the Convention on Biological Diversity, which unfortunately the US is not a party to, although it does participate in the negotiations.
So again, the idea is to keep that 30% of the land or the ocean and the land wild.
It's both.
Yeah, but to protect the wild. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I think Ellen, you had your hand up first, then Suzanne, and then Sister
I did.
Carol.
Thank you for mentioning the Eastern Hellbender. I put a note in the chat about it. Until recently, lived in Western New York, and Hellbenders inhabit the Allegheny River, which flows into the Ohio River and is actually part of the Mississippi watershed. And the Allegheny State Park has an annual event called the Allegheny Pilgrimage, where they had a program on the hellbender. It's not exactly a pretty animal, but you'll never forget it if you meet one. They're just extraordinary. And fortunately, part of the Allegheny River is in Seneca Nation territory. So the Seneca Nation has been very committed to the survival and well-being of these creatures. They can only live in cold water, so in clean water, so they're a good indicator of the health of a river. And they have required all the fishermen who get fishing licenses from the nation to learn about the hellbender and how to help preserve them. So it's just an amazing animal, and we're happy to have it in New York State. Thank you.
Thank you. Suzanne, and then Carol.
Thank you, Peggy. I hesitate to bring this up, but no, I'm wondering if your center has considered the impact of plastic pollution on species extinction, or if it's sort of too early to tell that yet.
Yeah, actually, we have an oceans program at the center that works to conserve the oceans, fights offshore oil drilling and those kinds of things, and also has a very active plastics campaign. And yeah, so it's something we're very much aware of. And actually, when the gentleman was speaking earlier, the fly fisherman, that, it's I forgot to mention pollution as another very big source of extinction and loss of species. And, particularly in ocean environments, it's had some very serious impacts on wildlife that end up just feeding seabirds and whales and sea turtles that end up feeding on plastic and end up just becoming filled. I'm sure you've seen the images. It's so horrible. It's hard to look at. So yeah, that's something we've been very aware of. And they've had some success fighting some new plastic plants down in Louisiana and elsewhere. So it's something we're also tackling. And also one of the things that I would just consider when you just project just a little bit into the future and you do the math, there's no way it adds up. If we keep producing so much plastic that doesn't break down, where does that lead? Nowhere good.
Sister Carol?
So just two very brief comments. One is religious organizations along the River Roar, since its very beginning, has been involved in educating our leadership, and they really took it to heart about land conservation and land easement. So a lot of the women and men religious congregations have really put aside their land, or at least parts of their land, and many times work with, I know, I'm not too sure about what we've done with here at the Mount, but I know with our some of our land up in Stanfordville, like we worked with the Duchess Land Conservancy, and other groups have worked with Scenic Hudson. So we do work with groups in the area that are involved in land easements, land conservation, to see how we might do that. So that's one thing. The other thing, it's not exactly the same thing, but I just want to say it here, is that we're also working with several groups on trying to promote a bill that was put forth by Representative Burke in the New York State Legislature. And it's been renamed, and he's going to put it forth again in this session. And it is the Bill of Rights of the Great Lakes and New York State waterways. And why I'm saying that is we've had discussions over maybe a year and a half now, and we were able to get the name changed and insert into this legislation Now, again, we have to realize when we're talking of Bill of Rights for waterways, for ecosystems, for aquifers, this is sort of like a movement that has to grow. So we certainly don't expect this bill to pass anytime soon, but we're trying to educate our legislators on the importance of these rivers, waterways, aquifers, ecosystems, and that they have a right as much as we do. So I just want to say that here, because I think this has a lot to do with this issue here, because if we don't protect these different, what can I say, whether it's the water, the land, the ecosystems, by protecting them, we'll also keep our help with the biodiversity of the systems. So I just thought I'd share that information with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol. That is really, yes, this is very much tied together. And we did a program, a co-sponsored program some time ago, maybe 6 months ago, about the rights of nature. And I think the little difference there, they're very much related, but the little difference, well, maybe it's not so different, Noah, you can say, but is what that rights of nature is saying is that nature and the species and the ecosystems should have a legal right to thrive and flourish, whether regardless of their economic value to us. It's not just about, well, this species will result in savings of X, number of dollars or something like that to human beings. It's about that they should have a right to thrive and flourish in themselves. I don't know. No, I'm sure that's, and every single person who works at the Center for Biological Diversity has that feeling too, whether or not I know the rights of nature is a little bit kind of still out there as a legal mechanism, but it's, I think what Sister Carol is saying is it's putting that ideal out there.
Yeah, I think it is an idea that's very much in line with what I'm talking about. And there are some countries, I believe Ecuador, I believe Bolivia, have granted rights to rivers and forests at different levels. And it's certainly something that I agree with. And I didn't mention that when I was talking about extinction, as it very much is a justice issue, an ethical issue. We're one branch of the tree of life. And so should we be cutting down all the other branches, is that right? And I think there very much is an ethical sort of justice component to the issue.
I just want to repeat another statistic that is from World Wildlife Fund, that they show in a recent report that there's a 73% decline in the average size of global wildlife populations in just 50 years. 73% decline in average size of global wildlife population. I mean, it's just stunning. It really is stunning. And there's a question in my mind, why is this not being spoken of in the same way that climate change? I mean, they're related, but they're not the same. I don't know, Noah, if you have any thoughts on that, like why it's been hard for people. That's why we're doing this series and hopefully co-sponsoring programs and maybe drawing in other groups, but it doesn't seem to be on the radar of most environmentalists, I would say.
Yeah, it's treated as a lower tier issue for some reason, and I don't understand why. I mean, I think actually polls show that the public, strong majorities of the public support protecting endangered species, including Republicans. So it's very much a bipartisan issue, and I don't think many support destruction of the natural world. So it is frustrating and something we're very much working, and it sounds like you too, Peggy, which I appreciate, is to make it a more prominent issue. I mean, one way that I gauge that is the presidential debates. It wasn't until, it was, I think, 2012 when you started to hear climate change in the presidential debates. And still not to the extent that it should be, but at least it gets mentioned, in every presidential debate since then. we really need to see extinction be on that same level of being a national concern and very much an issue that must be addressed.
I have another question for you that I'd really like to hear the answer to, and that is, so Suzanne mentioned plastics. So we've been struggling with the issue of PFAS in our drinking water, and some of the others also have PFAS in their drinking water. I've read a lot, many of us have read about the impact, the health issues that PFAS and phthalates and some of the other chemicals in plastics can cause in human beings. But I'm always wondering, like, what does this do to wildlife? Are they impacted? Like, for example, fertility issues or other kinds of, how does it impact wildlife? And what about plants?
Yeah, I'm not sure about plants, but yeah, I mean it affects wildlife very much so, and it's yeah, something to be concerned about. That's another unfortunate toll of the election. I'm sure you're all aware that the EPA was requiring municipalities to take steps to remove PFAS from drinking water, and the Trump administration has pulled that back. So that's not happening now. And I believe companies 3M. I actually grew up in Minneapolis. I grew up in Minnesota, and 3M is a Minnesota corporation, and the story around that of just they knowingly poisoned pretty much all of us. It's pretty much universally found in all of us, PFAS, which is kind of astounding. So yeah, wildlife are very much affected by pollution. One set of studies I know about because of a scientist named Tyrone Hayes, who did work on atrazine, which is a really commonly used herbicide, and studied its effects on frogs, on amphibians, and found that it had really serious effects on them. So yeah, these pollutants, as they affect us, are affecting wildlife as well. And I know PFAS, they've found some strange things in Minnesota where kind of the core of PFAS pollution is, because that's where it was created. They definitely find mutations in wildlife species.
So I have a couple of other quick questions, but I just want to make sure I'm not missing somebody else's question. Marcy, go ahead.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. I was taking a lot of notes, and I was trying to take notes about some of the high points that were like little opportunities for action and some sort of positive messaging. I think the Hellbender seems like one of them. It seems like it's like everybody wants to know what that is. And also just about saving the Invasive Species Act from misrepresentation, what might be one, because it seems like people kind of talk about it from the other side as something that's silly or not worthwhile. Also, the Bill of Rights, thank you for bringing that up. But I'm just wondering about young people, how you can use these kind of more positive messages. There's a lot of older people like me in this talk right now, and I've been thinking a lot about how to empower younger people in our community on a number of issues like this. And I wonder if you have any success stories or, like something that points in that direction.
Oh, thanks for the prompt, Marcy. Yeah, I didn't mention that part. The Endangered Species Act has had a lot of success. Actually, 99% of species that were protected under the Endangered Species Act are still around today. And many species have recovered in numbers. I was going to mention the piping plover. Efforts to protect their beach nesting habitat has resulted in dramatic increases in numbers. And so when we put our minds to it, when we work to care for the land, we can have success. We can, the bald eagle is another one. We banned DDT, and bald eagles were almost wiped out across the United States, and now you can see them in every state. Peregrine falcon, similar, osprey, which was never listed, but again was devastated by DDT. So when we put our minds to it, when we pass legislation, when we pass laws, when we do work, we can have success and protect species. And I was going to mention, it's true that rivers have gotten warmer, that we've seen more siltation, but the Clean Water Act has also had many successes. We've seen pollutants removed from rivers. What was it? Is it the Ohio River in Cleveland that actually caught fire and now is much cleaner? So there is hope, and we can make a better world if we put our minds to it. It's a little bleak right now with the election, but I think things are going to turn back. At least I certainly hope so after these 4 years are over. And it sure does feel like a long 4 years given the last 3 weeks, but it's gonna come to an end, and we're gonna see something better.
Thank you.
Sure. And the subject of the hellbender, and then maybe we can talk a little bit more about solutions. I'm understanding that amphibians are particularly endangered, and that there may be some other factors that are affecting them.
Yeah, amphibians are one of the more endangered groups. Roughly a third of them are at risk, and they're particularly sensitive because they breathe through their skin. So they're sensitive to pollutants. They're sensitive to habitat destruction. In many cases, they have a complex life cycle where they need more than one habitat type. They need freshwater and terrestrial habitat. So if something goes wrong in either one of those, it can impact them. And then many frog species around the world are impacted by a disease called chytrid fungus. Again, another disease that was spread by our movement of plants and animals. And that's been a concern. And there's many scientists that are working to try and solve that problem. So yeah, amphibians, another group that's, in North America. North America is really a center for diversity of mussel species. And as many as 70% of mussel species are at risk of extinction in North America. So it's another group that's very much at risk. Mussels are important. They're filter feeders, so they clean our water. So again, another example of an ecosystem service provided by species.
Marcy, did you have your hand up, or you just left it up? No? Okay. Okay, I kind of made a few notes partly from what you're talking about, but like solutions. One thing is that there are actions on the Center for Biological Diversity. They have actions, and they have action alerts. You can sign up for those action alerts. One of their action alerts is about calling your Congress, our Congress representatives and our senators about the cuts in funding to EPA. So there are layoffs they're planned layoffs for more than 1,000 employees of the EPA. And already, close to 200 staff who are placed on administrative leave. So obviously all the kinds of efforts that we've been talking about get completely, hamstrung by if they don't have the employees to carry these things out. So I'm sure if anything, we need an increase in funding for EPA. So that is something you can do. And I'm going to give the numbers right now for all the people, our representatives, to make it easy for you. So, okay, Mike Lawler. I don't have for all the the Congress members, but I do have for Mike Lawler, who's for Rockland and for parts of Westchester and Putnam. And his number is 845-201-2060, 845-201-2060. So call him to, to tell him to oppose the cuts in funding to the EPA. Schumer is 212-486-4430. 212-486-4430. I would expect both of our senators to oppose it, but I don't know. Maybe it comes up in a package and they feel constrained to it, whatever. We want to make sure that they do. And Gillibrand is 845-875 4585. So that's a good thing that you can do tonight. You can do it tomorrow. Yes, Susan?
Could you just put that in an email to all of us?
Sure. Okay, some other things. Noah mentioned the Amazon. I think many of us are aware that it's very threatened habitat. Obviously species, everything suffers when the habitat, a large, major, I don't know. Noah, do you want to say a word about that? A couple of words about the Amazon? Because it is.
Yeah, I mean, just the tropics in general. It's when you move closer to the equator, biological diversity increases greatly. Which isn't to say that our northern ecosystems aren't just as important for the function of the planet and the ecosystems they are, but in terms of just direct species loss, when you lose Amazon rainforest, you lose a lot of species, and so it's tragic to see. And
I think the Amazon also gives us 20% of the world's oxygen.
Right.
So
this is very serious. Yeah, and I think it's kind of at a tipping point, right? Am I right?
I think that's right. I mean, I think, we're seeing, I've mentioned increases in fire, and, we're starting to see fires in tropical ecosystems that didn't historically burn. So that's concerning, and it's another reason to be concerned about increasing temperatures.
So one thing that you can do about that is to eat less meat, or to not eat, refrain from eating meat, or eat less meat. Yeah.
Especially beef. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Sister Carol?
It just dawned on me then. I think my saying this, we all know this, but it's good for me to remind myself too, is I think we are all very involved in a lot of things, and how important it is to see how it's all connected. So when you mentioned the Amazon, I know many of us have been, we worked last year to get the Tree Act in New York State passed. And of course it passed, but Governor Hochul did not sign it. And so the Tree Act is one of those things which would put some kind of, if you want to say, parameters around who New York State contracts with in terms of things that come from forests, and it would only, buy certain things. So it's very connected to deforestation, the Tree Act. So I guess, as you say, the Amazon, and I'm thinking also the leachate loophole, because that's another issue that's very big in New York State now. And when I go to these meetings on the problem that we're having with leachate in our drinking water and rivers, that is also connected to biodiversity. So I'm just saying that we are working on these issues, and how it's important not to put the biodiversity in one silo, and nuclear in another silo, and PFS in another silo. It's all very interrelated and interconnected. So I'm making that statement more for myself. Maybe you don't need it, but it helps, because we can't do everything. But when I work on one thing, didn't we say it in the beginning, we're working on other things too.
George?
Another factor that I don't think we've mentioned is rising human population. Human population is continuing to go up, and it's a very important fundamental driver of all these things.
Thank you. I think that's clear. Yes. Also consumption. So, Noah mentioned overexploitation of resources. So consume less, be more mindful about it. Donate to a group that's focused on this issue, such as the Center for Biological Diversity, the Nature Conservancy, Conservation International. These are groups that either study, bring forward the science, or that preserve the habitat that Noah mentioned, the 30 by 30. Yes, Sarah?
Yeah, I live in Westchester, and for all of us in our area, it's already quite developed, and in our towns, there are always developments that are coming before the planning board, that they want to develop all these remaining areas, and they're not necessarily big swaths of nature, but they're important in our community. And so those of us who are concerned, we go up in front of the board and we talk about the value of trees, and we talk about the importance of biodiversity. But it's really hard to get quantitative data that you can put in front of a planning board to say, why are the trees and the wildlife and the plant life as important, if not more so, than whatever the developer is proposing in that site. Are there any resources that anyone's aware of that we could kind of tap, for those types of arguments?
Amen to that.
Saw a study out of the University of Chicago that looked at land value and determined that there was a clear benefit of natural areas and of protecting species, that land values were actually higher around protected areas, which makes sense. So, I mean, I tend to not go to the economic arguments for protecting areas, but I think there is one to be made, which is that, the areas surrounding those, that protecting parts of the natural world will enrich us all, including economically through the value of our own land.
And maybe aerial views too, where you see how little you can show a space, that people can actually see it.
That piecemeal thing that Sarah mentioned is really hard. I almost feel like it's the cumulative impact of all these little pieces, and each individual decision is only looking at that one little piece. I almost feel like we need some kind of legislation that would force them to look at the cumulative impact. Susan, and then maybe we should wrap up this discussion.
So he worked on the cleanliness of the watershed. That's a constant thing, because it's so great to get a little piece of land on the watershed, and we have all those places, reservoirs, and we're constantly encroaching on them. And so then if you had to clean up all that water that you get that goes through the watershed for New York City, Westchester, you would be penalized a great deal. But from an individual point of view, it's just a nice little piece of land that you could look at that brings you closer to the reservoir, brings you closer to the lakes. So there's this tension that comes all along. It's very tempting if you don't look at it as a whole issue.
Right. Okay. Marcy, and then Morgana, I do see your note and then yes, we should wrap up the discussion a little bit. And I wanted to also give Christine a minute to talk about Audubon's initiative. Yes, Marcy?
I did want to address one thing that Marcy had said. I think it was Marcy. No, it wasn't Marcy.
Okay.
But with towns that want to develop, one of the strong points is that it actually sometimes costs the towns more and the people more with taxes than leaving open spaces. Another thing are the green corridors. So, biodiversity, I wasn't here if you were talking about that, Noah, but greenways, green corridors, so biodiversity stays healthy by being able to migrate. And so if you can point that out to a town where, they could protect a greenway going into another town or this, that's a strong argument. But the economic one, where, a developer has roads going in and this and that, and they say we'll get all the taxes, it actually sometimes costs taxpayers more.
No, it's a good point. That's a good point. Okay, Marcy, and then I want to try to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my comment was sort of along the same lines. I mean, I live in Nyack, and it's a small community that's largely built out, but we have a lot of focus in Nyack and the surrounding areas on green infrastructure and sort of budding awareness over 10 years or so that impervious surfaces are a real issue because of stormwater management, which, flooding and water quality issues that have cost municipalities a lot of money. So there is that intersection there on the cost question. And then there's also in our community awareness of pollinator pathways and the value of, doing the plantings that support wildlife in your own backyard and on any place you can find it. So there are these little interventions or places that you can get to impact decision making in municipalities around this land use and codes to advance that agenda for protecting green space.
So I do want to wrap up so we can go on to talking about local issues also and state, but just kind of try to keep it a little bit quick. I want to mention one more action, and that is to talk about it. Just like we've been talking about it this evening, make the connection for other people. Teach children and grandchildren to be good stewards of the earth. I mean, all of these things are extremely important that we, just like people, now it's climate change, everybody understands. Most people are very well aware of it, but there still is not this awareness around the issue of biodiversity. Christine, I know you wanted to talk about an initiative of Audubon around this issue too.
Yeah, I was gonna thank you, Peggy. I was just gonna real quickly mention three of them. Well, one is the Cuomo bridge lights. So we have a letter in about turning off the Cuomo bridge lights during migration in the evening hours. And it was signed on by 9 different nonprofits, including the Sierra Club Atlantic Chapter, Rockland Audubon Society, Rockland Astronomy Club, Riverkeeper, Scenic Hudson, and several more. And the New York State Thruway Authority, received it, and they indicated they'll review and get back to us shortly. So that's the latest. And then another initiative, kind of related to that we're working on this year is about windows collisions. And actually, the Cuomo Bridge does have good glass that prevents the windows collisions with the birds, but the windows collisions is actually prevalent. It's very known for being common on like the tall rise buildings, but it's also pretty prevalent on like lower rise buildings and residential homes. So we're working on this year getting out the information to the public about products that are effective in preventing the birds from colliding, and they also look very good on the glass. So one of those products is called Feather Friendly. And then another initiative we have is the Rockland Audubon Society Certified Bird Sanctuary. And Peggy, is it okay if I quickly showed my screen or not?
It's just that, let's hold that for another time because we're running out of time and we have other things too. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. And and the Certified Bird Sanctuary program is essentially about shrinking your lawn and putting in a variety of native plants that the birds and other animals have co-evolved with. Also having a water source and making sure that it's good nesting habitat. But if you'd like more information about it, just go to Rockland Audubon's website and feel free to send us any questions about it.
Thank you so much. Okay. Noah, I want to thank you very much. This was really a great introduction. It kind of really laid out, gave us a sense of the scope that I think one of the takeaways for me this evening was that research showing the impact of climate change, that if we cannot keep it close to 1.5 degrees, we're risking 1/3 of species of wild. I don't know if that was wildlife or wildlife and plants, but it's really very daunting and just really, I hope everybody starts talking about it, and don't forget to call Mike Waller, Schumer, Gillibrand about the EPA layoffs. You can also go to the Center for Biological Diversity to look at their other action alerts and sign up for alerts. But at any rate, no, I just want to thank you very much for your talk.
Oh, thanks, Peggy, and thanks all of you for your interest.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll also be having a speaker on population from the center. I think we're talking, and don't forget, April. Don't hang on. Don't go away. We're just about to talk about other local issues, but just that April 17th, we're going to have a talk on pandemics. What's the connection between pandemics and the loss of biodiversity? So that's with a scientist as well. So I want to also talk about some of the other issues that we've been filing. Christine mentioned the bridge. That's a follow-up on the Dark Skies program that we did a few months ago, that I also think of as part of this series on biodiversity. And we're waiting for a response from the DEC, but they did acknowledge that they received it. Another one is the New York Heat Act. So I was wondering, Jackie, did you want to report on the lobby?
I'll be happy to talk on that.
A few
but
weeks
I'd also
ago?
like to say, you can also come to the protest at Lawler's office on Wednesday at 12:30. Although the focus is on the fact that he's cutting the Department of Education, and that includes Head Start. It's about all of the cuts. So if people want to come and talk about the water and the EPA, you're welcome to join with all of us.
Okay, and we'll talk in a minute about other protests about Trump and that kind of
Right.
thing.
Well, this is particular to Lawler because he's in district. Okay, so I was up at the lobby day with John and Lauren Cavuto and Steve Lee, and we met with some legislators. It was a fantastic rally day for New York Heat. We actually met with our new Assemblyman, Aaron Weeder, who didn't seem to know anything about the New York Heat and may be interested in having a Zoom. Also, we met with representatives from Pat Carroll's office, who's our new Assemblyman, Dan Johnson, and I cannot remember the woman's name, but they would be interested in knowing more information. I will say that Ken Zabrowski, although he signed off on the Climate Superfund Act and he signed off on the CO2 fracking ban, he did not sign off onto the New York Heat. So there may be a legacy holdover there, but we will inform Pat Carroll about that as well. Maybe plan a Zoom with someone from Food and Water Watch, one of their policy people on that, for both of them. And we also met with a woman who's already a champion of the New York Heat Act. And again, I can't remember her name. So we were just encouraging her staff to encourage her to continue to reach out to other members and come along with the gang on the New York Heat Act. Okay. It was a very, very good day. New York Heat sponsored the whole thing, and Food and Water Watch helped support it. So that's the story that I have there. We had a great time, and there were, I don't know, 200 or more, 300 people, 200 people maybe, on the Great Staircase, and great speakers from the Assembly and the Senate.
John and Ellen, did you want to say anything more about New York Heat Act?
Uh, After John, I'll go.
Okay, okay, John and or Steve. I know you were all there. Yeah.
Well,
John,
I'll jump in then. I was there representing the Sierra Club. I've been involved in Renewable Heat Now, which is kind of the umbrella campaign. It almost passed last year. It hadn't been for some difficulties at the end of session, it would have. So we're pretty optimistic. Next week, the legislature is out of session, so you can drop in at your local assembly member or state senator's office and put in a word for supporting the New York Heat and some of the related legislation that will make New York Heat work, such as subsidies for preparing homes for electrification. It was a very successful event. There's going to be another one in March.
Oh, great.
Which
Do you know when?
Peggy, I'll send you the information, Peggy, so you can send
Okay.
it.
Okay.
I also wanted to say, although it's a long shot, I did bump into Senator Weber that day, who's our Republican state Senate senator, and actually he was also interested. So I'm going to try to prepare a Zoom for all of three of them or four of them.
If I could just add, my new assembly member, Dana Levenberg, is one of the champions,
Oh, yeah.
they say, of New
Not
York Heat.
surprised there.
Yeah.
John or Steve, do you want to? John, do you want to add anything? You have to unmute yourself if you do.
Steve's there.
Yeah, you don't have to, but if you want to, yeah.
Right. Jackie covered the basics. So, I think we did the same thing last year. There was a bus from Rockland. I think by now, people in Albany should get the idea. Prices on energy and probably a lot of other things are going to go up dramatically. All the stuff that the federal government is doing. So it's really in their politicians' best interest to get this passed, I think.
Okay. John, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I thought it was also very successful. A lot of people turned out, more than I've seen, I think, in the 3 times I've been. So it looked like at least as large as that. And we're so close. It should pass. I like the extra tweaks that they add to it that was just mentioned. So we're gonna some extra money to actually do some of the work that has to be done on the front side in order to make, like if you're going to get heat pumps and stuff like that, you first have to have some of these other things remediated, like mold and drafts, that kind of stuff. So that's a heavy lift for most people. So hopefully some of this extra money will actually help advance that.
Janet?
I think the things that we just were talking about just now are the most important things, because all of this all of this knowledge that we have doesn't mean anything to a lot of people. And I think the new administration is waking people up to a lot of things that they never thought about or were not important to them over many years because it didn't matter. But now almost everybody is probably going to be affected in some way or another about what's been happening on the national scene. And I think the direction that all organizations need to go is to get out the word to individuals, not just to knowledge, but to you have to do something about it now because this is what's going to happen now. So I guess it's action. It's point of view. My point of view is action is very important.
I couldn't agree more. So I think that brings me to talking about, the onslaught about what's going on right now and actions that we can take about the Trump administration's actions. So Suzanne, I don't know if you had your hand up about that, but I know you did want to talk about an action that you're organizing.
Yes, thank you, Peggy. So the Orangetown Democratic Committee is organizing a 1 hour protest against Mike Lawler and his connection to Elon Musk every Saturday at noon at the corner of Route 59 and North Middletown Road in Nanuet. So it's 1 hour. You come, you bring signs, and the purpose of it is to make Rockland residents aware of Lawler's connection to Elon Musk and the fact that he took $1.7 million from him in 2024, the second largest donation after that of Musk, after that to Trump. So that's one thing, we hope to do it every Saturday, weather permitting. It's just 1 hour to get the word out because people don't know about Lawler and they probably don't know that he's getting or gearing up for a run for governor. So we want to stop him in his tracks. The other thing, Peggy, if I could just mention, we're lobbying now for the New York State Legislature to pass the Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act. This will address all types of packaging, single-use packaging, specifically plastic. So if you have any interest in learning more about this, I would love to fill you in.
Great. And we were talking, again, that ties in with everything that we're talking about. Yeah, it's just, I think my feeling is that, one of the things that I was hearing from somebody, maybe Suzanne, it was you, I think it was you actually, was that calls to legislators is actually one of the most effective things we can do. I don't know if you want to say a word about that.
Yeah, so people wonder, well, should I write a letter? Should I send an email? What do I do? So we have heard that the one most effective outreach method is to simply call your legislators because they can ignore emails, they can not open letters if they don't want, but they have to have somebody who staffs the phone. And they will pick up the phone. And the beauty of it is you can also call after hours and just leave a message. And you'll still at least be heard.
So I want to suggest that everybody on this Zoom commits to calling, let's say, Mike Lawler once a week, if that's your legislator, or whoever else is your local representative. Tell them about the cuts to the EPA. Tell them about, we're not going to tell them about the state legislation, but tell them, how upset you are about his connection to Elon Musk and Elon Musk, any of the things, the cuts to other agencies, but, just call once a week. Another one is the lead in water issue. So there was a rule that was that was enacted in 2024 requiring toxic lead water pipes to be replaced in a decade. And the Republicans are trying to repeal that. This is insane. Call Mike Lawler's office about it. I'll give the number again in a minute. I had not heard, I think Noah Greenwald mentioned that the EPA is rolling back the new regulations for PFAS chemicals that are the toxic chemicals in our drinking water. I had not heard that already is happening. I imagined that it would happen, but if that's true, that's outrageous, and that's a local issue, and it affects all of his constituents, or all of his Rockland constituents, and some of his Westchester and some of his Putnam constituents. So call Mike Lawler about that. Again, 845-201-2060, 845-201-2060. Call multiple times about each of those issues. Marcy, Marcy, did you have your hand up, or you just left it by mistake? Wait, Jackie, 1 second. Yeah. Marcy, did you just leave your hand up, or you have your hand up again? Okay, Jackie, go ahead.
Okay, I would like to say actually that Mike Lawler is now on record 2 times saying that he is opposed to rolling back the lead pipe rule. He is
Okay.
opposed. He is not. He is opposed to that change. But there's so many things that we do have to hold him accountable to, and actually that one, in spite of the fact that he's on the record saying he's opposed to that changing that rule, we still have to force him on that. And I did also want to bring up, especially also regarding PFAS, that a bill that Peggy and I had worked on, and Gail Pisha, is coming up again. It's being renewed, rewritten. Kind of, it's called the right to, we think it might be called the Right to Know Water Bill. And hopefully I'll be looking for a letter or a memo of support from the Sierra Club Atlantic chapter on that. But that's something that we all need to be aware about, because it really started because of the lack of knowledge to consumers about the PFAS in their water and trihalomethane. So Peggy and I are working on that, and we may need everyone's support at some point. Thank you.
Great. Okay, I want to just, Morgana, I'm sorry that I didn't, there's one more comment in the chat that we didn't get to before. Morgana is sort of asking a question. She says, I'm part of the very vibrant and spiritual ecstatic dance community, which is growing rapidly. And these young people are deeply concerned about the environment and wildlife conservation. And I'm wondering what specific calls to action I can promote at these events and key messaging. So I'm really kind of throwing that out for everybody.
Yeah, and
I just
thank
want
you.
to say also that to me, one of the key things that you can do is connect young people, get them out in the natural world, take people for a hike. I just want to put in a plug that Sierra Club is now starting to revive our hike program. We have a terrific person who's taking that on to lead hikes. But yes, Morgana?
Yeah, I would love it more information on that. Thank you, Peggy. Well, they're very much outdoorsy people, but I have a captive audience once a month at our dances here in Nyack at the First Reformed Church. And I guess there are just so many organizations and so many different things going on. And I just wanted to kind of narrow it down potentially and just like take that opportunity to get in front of them and get their attention. But maybe, like you said, the hikes are a good way to do that. Because they're always looking to do that. They're always looking to be out in nature and in community. So maybe that's
To
a good
me,
way.
I'm going to take a guess that everybody here on this call has a deep connection to the natural world. And very often that happens when you're young. And that kind of makes you somehow bond with the natural world. You can't care enough to fight for the natural world if you don't love it yourself, if you don't feel connected to it.
Yeah.
So that's a deep belief of mine. Susan? Yes.
Just very briefly, I wonder if it's effective to thank Lola, because he wants votes, to thank him for taking a position and not wanting about lead in the pipes. I think you have power. Instead of telling him no, 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 tell him, oh yeah, I'm supporting, I'm supporting your stand on this. I'm just wondering if it's politically effective.
I don't know the answer to that. I see a note from Suzanne, which is kind of expressing the same thing that I was thinking. Unfortunately, Mike Lawler often verbalizes a moderate position only to actually vote with MAGA.
But so then you're watching him to see that he follows through.
Right. I think that's a good one to.
But he also jumped in first right off the bat on the Save the Hudson River bill. So there are times when I'm not saying I'm going to be out there on Wednesday protesting him, but there are times when he does do what he says. So we need to keep it in mind. That's all.
Either way, whether you call and thank him for his stand and say how important it is to you, or whether you say, I hope when it comes to a vote that you will make sure that you vote this way, I think he will get the message either way. And the same with PFAS and the rollback EPA of the new regulation on PFAS. They had come out with a finding that PFAS chemicals are toxic at even the lowest levels, the lowest detectable levels. And now they're going to turn around and undo the regulation. I mean, that's just horrendous. And this is a local issue for him. because his constituents, as I said, in 3 different counties are being impacted, especially in Rockland, but in parts of Westchester and Putnam as well, are being impacted by it. So I think this is one where he really, and yeah. Okay. Any other last, I want to let everybody go so that you'll want to come again. Any other last questions or comments? Sarah, I see you unmuting.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, thank you very much, Peggy, for organizing another interesting program. And we'll look forward to March 17th and April 21st.
Okay.
So, thank you
and
all.
just again, I feel is somebody, and forgive me, I can't remember who it was. I'm just looking. Said the most important thing is actions, and we need both. We need that. Eleanor, I think it was. We need the knowledge, which is why I think it's important for us to be informed ourselves about the scope of the problem of. I think we all know there's a problem of extinctions, but the scope of it is breathtaking. It's really stunning. And so we need to kind of feel that sense of urgency that's commensurate with the scope of the problem. I mean, 1/3 of species, if we pass 1.5, which we're in danger of doing, we've got to keep, 1.5 degrees Celsius. It's stunning. So all of the things that we need to think about more ways to tackle this. I mean, we listed a number of them. You can also call it and ask Lawler to oppose the layoffs at the EPA. That's just another one. But again, please make sure you take action. Call Lawler, commit to calling him once a week, whatever it is. We listed a whole bunch of things. Talk about the problem. And yes, make sure that you're going to take away a few actions from this. Anything else? Any last comments, questions, complaints? Okay, so come again, come March 17th to hear about the issue of nuclear power and the question, to get answers to the question, is nuclear the answer to global warming or one of the answers? Is there a difference between the new kinds of nuclear options that are being proposed and the old ones? Are they really any better? So thank you very much for coming, all of you, and we'll see you next month, or if not sooner. And I'm glad to stay on the line for a few minutes in case there's anybody who wanted to talk or to ask questions. So I'm going to stop the recording here, but thank you, everybody, and I'll stay on.